But here we go. Mellow Mode. Oh god, this was a thing from Yoshi's Epic Yarn. Basically, if you lost enough times, they give Yoshi wings and make him invincible. It's the gold Tanuki suit thing that I absolutely hate with a passion. Yoshi's Crafted World. This was a game I went into with a great deal of skepticism because while I'm a big fan of Yoshi's Island and the Yoshi games, hell, I even like Yoshi's Story, a game that's often looked down upon by a lot of people, I went into the previous game, Yoshi's Woolly World, quite excited just because even though I had very low expectations of it, I expected it to be a Yoshi game, and that's basically what it was, but I found that game to be wholly disappointing, and part of the reason is because they decided to kind of sort of make it a sequel to Kirby's Epic Yarn in its own kind of weird way. But unlike Kirby's Epic Yarn, who took its aesthetic and made it a mechanical thing, that game, it was wholly just a visual thing for the sake of inadequately explained shrug, really. Whereas this game, it goes back to the roots of Yoshi-style games, and it does try and take a more crafty approach, which has been done since Yoshi's Story on the N64, but it doesn't feel like it's purely a visual thing. But at the same time, it doesn't evolve the formula by leaps and bounds, or really add anything new to the series. Now the story follows, and this is going to shock you, but Yoshis and their magical fridge magnet of destiny losing the 5 magical Dragon Ball Chaos Emeralds of acrylic power that allow it to grant any one wish. They now have to scour the land and collect all the acrylic Chaos Emerald Dragon Balls to get a wish and have some fun along the way and learn some nonsense about friendship and love and something. And certainly not about breaking your back carrying a child from point A to point B, which I kind of miss, honestly. Like I just said, minus the whole child relay race aspect of it that was in the original Yoshi's Island, this game plays like pretty much every Yoshi's Island. You run, you flutter jump, you ground pound, you lick up enemies, which turns them into eggs, which you can then use to throw at other enemies, or use to interact with bits of environment to solve minor puzzles. And they actually do try and work in puzzles rather regularly into their level design, which is really refreshing. One new thing they've decided to add, however, is the ability to interact with foreground and background bits of environment with your eggs. And in the grand scheme of things, this is both overutilized and underutilized. And I know that's a weird thing to phrase, but basically, here's what happens. You can hit things in the background, and you can get a few coins for it. And in the long run, that's not worth very much. Occasionally, you will find a Super Happy Flower, which is sort of your Super Mario stars that allow you to progress through the world through this means. And sometimes you will find little time challenges that force you to do this. And those are all well and good, though I find them to be a little bit disorienting because they flip the world backwards on you when you do it. But that's a very minor use of interacting with the environments. There's a much, much bigger use, and again, I'm going to step back and bring up Kirby's Epic Yarn again with one of my biggest problems with that game, which is they really, really, really like to milk minimal amounts of content in this game. And what I mean by that is going through a level is simple enough. You know, you beat the level, you clear some obstacles, you solve some puzzles. Ideally, you collect an average of 5 flowers per level, and you move on. But to get more flowers, you then have to play the level a second time, in reverse, looking for little Poochie Pups. And they're basically like mini dogs that are playing hide and seek with you. You have to hit them with eggs and then run to the exit for another, potentially 4 flowers. Now, that's actually not necessarily a bad idea, because instead of going through the level like you normally do, you actually do it in reverse with the entire perspective of the world flipped. And certain levels, albeit very rarely, actually play kind of completely differently because their puzzles are already solved or have to be solved in reverse in order to get back to the start. Granted, that's maybe 2 or 3 levels in the entire game off the top of my head that did that. This really wasn't as well thought out as it could have been. But going back to my key problem of milking very little content, goes back once again to Kirby's Epic Yarn, which was the apartment where you'd run into people who would basically challenge you to go into the level a number of times and do the same objectives over and over and over. And that is still here. And it's worse, because at the start of every world, you run into like this little robot thing who you have to give your flowers to in order to advance. And then as you progress through the levels, they then say, "I want souvenirs," which requires you to go into a world and hit random nonsense in the background to collect for them. And you have to do this like at least 5 times per world. And it gets tedious real fast. And it's frustrating because there's so many flowers in this game. And to know that a decent portion of them are just relegated to running around hitting nonsense in the background is just infuriating, especially because there's only like 40 levels in this game. But if you want 100% in this game, you're gonna have to play through like at least 200 levels to collect everything, and that's assuming you do the standard level perfectly the first run. This game really likes to milk its content, and not in a sensible way, because just running around collecting nonsense in the background, while I'll admit it's clever that it forces you to sort of interact and pay attention to the art design and the backgrounds and stuff, it's not fun or interesting. It's not a neat way to utilize the mechanics. It's not a new way to look at the worlds. Hell, even the Poochie levels at least occasionally kind of rework the levels to play differently in order to have to play each level backwards. This doesn't even do that. It's just mindless time wasting. Now the nice thing is, if you're not trying to collect every single flower, you really don't need to. I ended up completing like the first fifth of the worlds, pretty much up to the first boss with all the flowers and everything, and when I beat the game I had like 150 flowers extra. However, they do get carried into a secret world that you unlock after you beat the game, and even then, it really wasn't required to do any extra grinding. I literally got to the end of that secret world with 1 extra flower. But then, the robot there tells you to give him like 341 flowers, which I'm guessing is the rest of them, and at that point I just put the controller down and said no. I'm not wasting that much time on just collecting random crap in backgrounds. I've got so many better things to do. But that's the thing about this game, is it spends so much of its time just reusing the stuff you've already seen and not reworking it in any meaningful way, and that really does kill the gameplay to this, I think. Which is unfortunate because it plays like any other Yoshi game. You know, it was more like the standard Yoshi's Island experience, and it did it relatively well. It just didn't give you as much content as it could have because it's too busy repurposing the same stuff and not in any way that's really enjoyable. Now, what I really did like about this game is how it handled its worlds, because like a lot of games, it has like, you know, grass world, desert world, mountain world, etc. But what's interesting is its worlds aren't necessarily locked into those preset definitions. For example, one of the earliest worlds is a water world, which means the first level's underwater, but the second one is a pirate town. It doesn't feel like every single level in a world is married to its specific theme, and that leads to quite a lot of variance in terms of level themes and designs. In fact, while I think a lot of the earlier levels are really, really bland and boring, pretty much, again, up to the first boss, that mountain minecart world I did not care much for. Once the world actually starts branching out in its world map design, which does happen and that's really cool, it feels a lot closer to, say, almost a Donkey Kong Country style game, where every single level has its own unique themes and gimmicks and concepts, and that's brilliant. It actually makes every single level enjoyable, which I love, not to beat a dead horse here, but makes me wish we had more levels and less repeating of the same content for pointlessness. But regardless, it's really cool. There are some bizarre tonal shifts from time to time. I mean, I remember playing one level that was super happy, and then the next level, I'm not even joking, was running around a dark alley trying not to get murdered by a guy with an axe, which came out of nowhere. That was legitimately scary, but still, you know, this game at least likes to play with its themes, and it's not married to an individual singular concept for every single world, which is really refreshing. And let's talk about the bosses, because I think the bosses by design are very, very clever in terms of their actual designs themselves, but I don't think the fights are terribly interesting. And in fact, I've pretty much seen every single fight in this game in other games. The first boss is a giant flying bird, which reminds me a lot of the first boss to Donkey Kong Country 2. There was a train that shoots pencils at you, which reminds me almost of an inverse of the final boss of Clockwork Knight. And of course, they really, really, really wanted to use the Baby Bowser fight from Yoshi's Island again, even though it really had no business being here. Now, another thing you can do to get flowers is collect coins. And that's because coins don't give you lives. You have unlimited lives because this game is ridiculously easy. That's another thing. This game has, like, no difficulty until after you beat the game, and then you play the secret levels, which aren't really hard so much as they're just stupid, because 90% of those worlds are just a giant pit, and there's, like, literally one egg for every collectible, so if you miss, great, go restart. Also, for whatever reason, dying in those levels is an instant death as opposed to a respawn, which is weird. Like, I don't mind Nintendo making levels that are challenging, but the rest of this game is stupid easy, and this is not clever level design or difficulty. This is just dumb and not terribly interesting. But going back to coins, I got a little off track there. I felt I needed to bring those up. Coins have a secondary purpose after collecting 100 to give you a flower, and that is Gashapon. Because for whatever reason, every single world has a gumball machine with little capsules in it that contain costumes. And these costumes are used to dress up your Yoshi of choice, with basically random knickknacks that sort of relate back to the level. At least in theory, because about 60% of them are like the same cardboard box, garbage can, or coffee creamer cup that's just recolored, which really sucks and is boring. It feels like 90% of these costumes no one actually put any effort into, and are really just there to eat your coins until you get the costume you want. Fortunately, no repeats, but still. Once you finally get a costume that you actually want, like a train or a cow, or in my case, the Raphael Raven boss fight from Yoshi's Island, seriously, that is the best costume ever. You also learn that these act as armor, and the rarer your armor, the more damage they'll take, which already takes a ridiculously easy game going back full circle, and makes it even harder to lose at. And perhaps what's even more baffling than already this ridiculously easy game getting stupid easier, they decided to go back to Yoshi's Woolly World and include Mellow Mode, where you can give Yoshi wings so he can't die in pits. And he can fly around and he gets more hearts, and it's just so wonderful because they decided to give him a gold Tanuki suit that makes him basically unkillable. I want to point out this game is stupid easy at this point. Bosses take 3 hits to kill, and while they do vary up their patterns, you know, they're not difficult by any means, except for the final one, which is like a boss gauntlet, which let's not talk about that. But still, I mentioned this during my Kirby's Epic Yarn review, and that is, this is not good for children. Children need to be challenged. They need to develop their skills, they need to get better, and they need to learn more about themselves and how to better tackle problems. Yes, it is a video game, but still, problem-solving skills apply universally. If you take away problems, you take away problem-solving, and suddenly you get a giant world of people who all get giant gold participation awards that somehow don't understand what is going to happen the moment any sort of opposition comes against them. It feels like by doing this, you take away the concept of people actually needing to try in order to achieve anything. Maybe that's coming from someone who tries ridiculously hard on a day-to-day basis to try and make himself get better known through this medium we call the internet, to middling results. But taking away the idea of having to teach children that you have to work towards what you want, you have to try your hardest, and you have to actually, like, problem solve to do stuff, taking that away, that is not good for child development at all. That concept alone, I said it for Kirby's Epic Yarn, and I'll say it here, is terrible for children. And that's me getting really passionate about seeing the world taking away people having to put in effort for anything. But like I said, maybe that's just because I overwork myself on a day-to-day basis. This game is fun, but it's stupid easy, and it over-recycles its own content to the point where it sucks. But the nice thing is, unless you're absolutely going for the weirdly difficulty-spiked bonus levels or anything, or trying to go for 100%, you don't have to do any of that. You can just enjoy the levels as is. And that is at least a fantastic option for a decent game. Now, the overall presentation of Yoshi's Crafted World is excellent, at least visually. Visually, everything looks like it's made out of actual, like, crafted objects, and like I said, you've got the Poochie levels which invert the world, and that actually shows you the backsides of stuff, so you see like popsicle sticks holding up flowers and stuff, so it really does feel like some kind of children's diorama of a world that this game sets up, and it's brilliant to see that. I love that quite a lot. I don't understand why the characters are all fuzzy. That came across more as distracting than anything. Maybe make them out of like clay, but seeing Yoshi made out of fuzziness was a little strange the first time. Audio wise, I don't know how to feel about the audio in this game though, honestly, because the sound design is fundamentally fine, but it feels like it kind of inverts the Super Mario World concept that I love so much, in that it tries to rework its melody into every song. But whereas Super Mario World would take every song and like rework the melody, change its tempo and pacing and stuff, here it just feels like the game focuses on the melody than the music that the melody is supposed to be built around, if that makes any sense. And that ends up making the music seem kind of just sort of bland and homogeneous and not terribly interesting, which is unfortunate. But that's really the only complaint I have against the presentation. It's decent. It looks great, and it sounds okay, but not mind-blowing or anything. Now, if you want a copy of Yoshi's Epic Yarn 2, Yoshi's Crafted World, I mean, it's a new game. I don't normally review these, but I did inadvertently play through it, so, you know, it's right now going to be about $80, and that is way too much for this game, honestly. It's a fun game, but it's not fantastic. I don't think this game is going to sell a Switch for anyone, and it shouldn't, because it's not really going to blow minds. But that said, if you already have a Switch, it's not a bad little addition to your library. That said, I would probably wait till it goes down in price a little bit, because it does feel a little bit lacking in really as many levels as it should have, so much as it does like to, once again, stay on individual levels for absurd periods of time that makes you really, really start to kind of hate this game a little bit. It's also ridiculously easy, so even if you're not very good at these sort of games, and even if you're going into this fresh, like I was, you should be able to beat this game in like 5 hours pretty handily. I think it took me 8, and that's because, again, I tried to 100% like the first fifth of the game. But that said, well, the first fifth of the game isn't necessarily the most interesting. It starts off on its blandest note. It gets really, really enjoyable after a while, but it makes you want more, and it makes you wish it didn't stay on those individual levels for such an absurd period of time. And while you might not get the most amazing game ever, I think this game stands pretty tall in the Yoshi spectrum. Granted, I've not played the DS games or the Game Boy Advance game, but you know what? It's a lot better than Yoshi's Woolly World, as far as I'm concerned, which probably puts it number 3 overall, but still, Yoshi's Crafted World is a fun little Yoshi game. I went into this game pretty skeptical, and I came out relatively entertained with it. There's some really good, shining moments of brilliant creativity in this game. It's just a shame that those bright, shining moments of brilliance are offset by a large, looming cloud of laziness. It's a house. Okay, that was interesting. I got them all from you, Wiggler. I want to ride the Wiggler. Exit's coming up. Aww. Long jump. Oh, and there's a little Owlcorn family. That's adorable.